Welcome to Free Soul Awakening, the podcast that invites you to liberate yourself from conditioning, fear, and self-doubt. And remember that your soul was never meant to be caged. It was meant to be free. Okay. Hey guys, welcome to my podcast, Free Soul Awakening. My name is Ashley. I'm an evidential medium, and I've been on my healing journey for about 4 years now. And today, you guys, very excited for this episode. We have my therapist, Danae.
Hi.
Danae, thank you for being on the podcast. Stoked.
My absolute pleasure. I'm so excited.
I'm probably more excited.
That's fair.
I'm-
That's fair.
I've been talking about it for forever, and I think we have too, because I'm like, when are you coming on?
Oh,
when
yeah.
are you coming on?
Mm-hmm.
And then I've been telling everyone on the podcast at the end, I'm like, my therapist is coming on. I'm gonna have Danae, and then it's literally been months. So
Yeah, it has been.
this I'm so excited. So do you want to tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Danae Knowles. I am a they them, so that's always fun. I'm a mental health therapist. I am what's called a licensed professional counselor, which is one of the many ways that you can get a credential to do mental health counseling. I actually just went to a master's program that was literally like professional counseling, and then I went and got my license after that. So I have been practicing since 2020 around. 2019, 2020, I graduated at some point there and started my like internships and licensing things, and have just kind of been doing mental health work ever since. My current population focus is on queer people, minority groups, neurodivergency, and sort of trauma-based things. I just find those fascinating. And as you know, Ashley, I am a systemic-based therapist for the most part. I use a lot of things any real good therapist is going to tell you. They're what's called multimodal, which is you're going to use whatever fits the situation. I like systems, so I focus mostly on how systems interact with us, which is part of why attachment theory is super interesting, and I'm so excited that you picked this topic.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to come looking for me, I'm on Psychology Today under Danae Knowles, or you can go to the website I have, which is authentictherapistadvice.org.
And I'll put that somewhere. Write it somewhere so people can see. Yeah, so I think there were so many topics I wanted to talk to you about. Like, I had a list, and then I thought, why not talk about attachment styles? You know,
It's an excellent one. It's an excellent one.
Yeah, I find it super fascinating. Just because even for me, not to jump the gun a little bit, but, I have a disorganized attachment style, which I find fascinating, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I know, like, we've talked about it, where it comes from.
You're allowed to say anything.
Okay.
I can't say anything.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Or I can't bring it up. You can bring it up because you're the one in charge of your own medical information.
Okay. So I'm just going to say, yeah, I have a disorganized attachment style, and I think it's fascinating because once I was self-aware enough to realize I had this style or even had an attachment style, what it was, going deep and finding out where it came from was really beneficial and important to hopefully one day having a secure attachment style, because I like to think, at least now, I'm probably mix. Like, I'm a mix of disorganized and secure. I would love to be secure, but I'm also self-aware to know I'm not there yet. Because I definitely feel things coming up. But yeah, so I did Google. I'm gonna just read what Google said. I guess definitions of the attachment style. So there's 4 attachment styles. There's a secure, anxious, avoidant, and then are we calling it anxious avoidant or disorganized? What do you?
I prefer disorganized because I think that makes more sense, but you will hear anxious avoidant referenced a lot in certain groups. Like, some people use it because it's older terminology. I think disorganized kind of makes more sense just because it's fewer words and it doesn't reference attachment styles that exist.
Okay, fair. So fair. Okay, so secure attachment is individuals with a secure attachment style are comfortable with intimacy and can balance dependence and independence in relationships. They tend to have positive self esteem and trust in others, leading to healthier and more stable relationships. And I wasn't going to ask questions in between this, but how many
Go for it.
how many people do have a secure attachment? Like I've never met anybody.
Well, it as much as we have four distinct labels, and it's very helpful for like professionally, especially to have good things to reference, it's helpful to remember that these things all present spectrums as spectrums rather than just like, well, you have a secure attachment, you have an insecure attachment, that kind of thing. A secure attachment, you can have a lot of degrees of secure, like you're experiencing, where you're having this growth and healing journey that's bringing in a lot of healthy elements of secure attachments, but you're still dealing with some of the things from other parts of attachment. Uh, so a decent amount of people have what could be considered a secure attachment. It's hard to say exactly. You have to do a lot to cause an insecure or like a dysregulated attachment style. At the same time, humans are really resilient and also easily distracted.
True.
So, it's very much person to person. But there are more secure attachments than you would necessarily think are out there. They just may
Mm.
not look the same. You might still have people like I would consider a secure attachment somebody who is able to acknowledge and accept where their weaknesses are and allow them to be a part of the relationship. Not necessarily that you don't experience them, but if someone's insecure, you should be able to go to your partner and say, hey, I'm feeling insecure about this. And your partner should be able to say, okay, I got you. Here's some reassurance. And you go about your day. And that
Okay.
is essentially a secure attachment style because you're comfortable dealing with what's happening.
Interesting. I do well now at this point I do that. Instead of
Hmm.
freaking out or feeling jealous, I'm like, hey, I'm actually
Yep.
insecure and this is why. Um, okay, so then we have anxious attachment, which is
Hmm.
individuals with this style often crave intimacy and may become overly dependent on their partners. They may worry about their partner's commitment and often feel insecure in relationships, leading to emotional highs and lows.
This kind of person, this kind of attachment style, you see replicated a lot in people pleasers. It's very, very attachment styles are all similar at one point. And like I said, I'm a very systemic thinker. So I'm like, oh, the base is this, and the little branches are like this. And the
Mm.
base is attachment and how do you deal with different difficulties that attachment brings you. But someone who's got an anxious avoidant attachment sort of style is constantly seeking approval or seeking acceptance, seeking to have their needs met by their partner, by whatever attachment they're looking at, parents, friends, relatives, whatever. And they are overly keyed into what another person is thinking, saying, or doing. So their attachment is anxious because it is very fearful, very reactionary, very, well, I want to make sure you're okay because I need you to be okay for me to be okay.
So do you think an anxious attachment, like someone who has an anxious attachment style, would that be someone who kind of loses themselves in a relationship because
Oh,
they just
absolutely.
want to become whatever the
Hmm.
person wants them to become?
Exactly. The fear of not having that person or that attachment or that support is going to be stronger than one's desire to be themselves.
All right, then we have avoidant attachment, which is individuals with an avoidant attachment style value their independence and often appear detached in relationships. They may avoid closeness and intimacy, using excuses to keep partners at a distance. This can lead to difficulties in forming deep connections.
So, this one, when kind of put next to anxious attachment, you have someone who's overly invested in the other person. This is someone who is underinvested in the other person. Uh, you can think of it sort of like, I can make sure you love me, or I'm going to make sure you can't hurt me.
But they still, I mean, wouldn't an avoidant still crave a
Oh,
relationship?
yeah,
Like
absolutely. Well, because human desire is to have relationships with people. We are social creatures. We want people in relationships. But an avoidant attachment style kind of person is going to be very hesitant, very guarded. They're not going to put themselves in a vulnerable position because the risk analysis that their brain has done has said it's more risky to have this close relationship and be hurt by it than it is to have no deep relationships. So I would rather protect what I know I can protect and not risk the chance of it being worse.
That makes sense. Okay, so then we have disorganized attachment, which is me. So this style is characterized by a lack of clear attachment behaviors. Individuals may desire closeness but also fear it, leading to unpredictable and often chaotic relationship patterns. This style is often associated with past trauma or inconsistent caregiving.
In this kind of style of attachment, you haven't learned what to predict. So in avoidant or anxious attachment styles, you have become accustomed to a certain way someone is. So if we look at parents, which this will definitely tie back to parenthood, childhood, that kind of thing a lot, because that's when these beliefs and systems are formed. If you look back at the way somebody parents a child, a harsh parent, like a strict authoritative parent, is more likely to find somebody with an avoidant attachment type, because what this child learned is that love and affection and relationship is very strict, harsh, uncaring. It's not safe to be vulnerable. It's not safe to have feelings in a relationship. So things are going to be like walled off. Someone with an anxious attachment style may find that they have a parent who is overly invested in them. So a parent who's really anxious themselves, a parent who we call it enmeshes. So a parent who's overly invested in their child's life, or a child who's being pulled into their parent's life at an unhealthy degree. But that kind of over emotionality is kind of key in that an anxious attachment thing, because you're feeling everything. There's no real separation between you and the other person and the feeling in between. A disorganized attachment style is going to be a mix. It's going to be a parent who some days walks home and is angry, and some days walks home and is sobbing, or a parent who has, or someone who has two parents who have extremely different reactive styles that both parent, or somebody who's just got inconsistent caregivers or abusive caregivers or neglectful caregivers. Like there's a gambit for that. And you will, if anyone goes out to research more about this, you may also find what is, I don't know if it's still considered the fifth attachment style or if they've kind of worked it into the rest of it. Psychology is a new field, so changes are consistently being made. I think they're
Mm.
not fast enough, but that's
Yeah.
personal. But you will hear things about reactive attachment disorder, or
Mm.
RAD. This is kind of disorganized attachment on steroids. It's somebody who has no control over their nervous system or how they respond to things. You find this sometimes a lot in, say, kids who are foster care or adoptees. I think there was I want to say Russian orphanages was probably the place where they were getting a lot of this data, because they were seeing that, these kids that were coming from Russian orphanages were just really not thriving. They would have these explosive, destructive,
Mm.
uh, emotional issues, and then tied with a complete inability to accept other people's emotions to them. So, like, they are relatively incapable in these studies of experiencing the love that their adoptive parents are trying to show them. But their anger is just off the charts. Like I said, it is a disorder. Uh, it's kind of tacked at the end of attachment styles, because it is what happens when attachment style goes really, really, really wrong. And it's very difficult to treat because, as seen with those Russian orphanages, these kids were not getting appropriate emotional care. They weren't getting support. They were not surrounded by people who cared about them. They were being left kind of to fend for themselves from a very young age, with no clear models on how to handle emotion, what to do, and only these authoritarian caregivers who are running an orphanage. And I'm not saying anything in particular about them. I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
don't remember what the status was of those places, but it made sense contextually from what I remember reading, that they wouldn't be in the position to be offering a lot of emotional support. And so it really came to light how important that early intervention of emotional support is, because kids who didn't have it came out really wrong. And it's very difficult to help someone with reactive attachment disorder because they're reactive, because everything you do is getting a reaction. And if these children don't manage to learn how to regulate their nervous system in some capacity, it's even less than they can't figure it out. They have no desire to, they have
Yeah.
no need to, because that piece of them is just firing incorrectly. Now, all of that to be said, there are people who have recovered from reactive attachment disorder. It's just a very difficult thing to treat.
I was gonna say it seems like it would take a really long time, and to be
Mm-hmm.
self-aware of that, especially when that's all you know is to be reactive, like you have
Mm-hmm.
to sit there and think, okay, is there something wrong with
Yep.
me? Is it, but they've been like that forever, so
Mm-hmm.
to sit and think, okay, I have this problem, or I'm being very reactive until someone maybe says something to them, or but
Yep. It's one of those things where you really have to be in the right place at the right time. But regardless, I mentioned that in part because, you might find it in some research, but also because it provides us this very interesting spectrum again of what attachment looks like and where you can fall on that range, and why disorganized types present a very uniquely difficult position to be in a lot of the time. Your body hasn't had the chance to develop consistent patterns. So, what it's had to do is develop consistent awareness and consistent fear responses in order to deal with that lack of attachment.
yeah, it's always fascinated me because I do have a disorganized attachment style, disorganized secure. Um,
You're getting there, you're
yeah,
healing it.
yeah. I'm trying.
This is
Yeah,
people crave affection and emotion and that attachment. It's why it can be very difficult working through trauma when you realize that you still feel that craving sometimes for people who have done horrific things to you in some cases. Like, I mean, I know with my own set of trauma, I have always struggled with the fact that I still love my family and my parents very much, even though they're, their own set of weird things, and they have impacted me in extremely negative ways as well. But I still want them to be my parents. They still are. And it's just kind of a biological piece that we have wired in us, is that we want those things. And the way that we choose to deal with it, whether it's that sort of over engagement or under engagement, is, or both, is just that
yeah,
produce of having broken parents, whether
yeah,
they've chosen to be or they just end up that way.
yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I feel like that's the majority of. I don't want to say majority because I don't know the stats, but majority of
It happens a
humans.
lot. How about that?
Yeah, at
A
least.
lot of people struggle.
Yeah, I was gonna say at least one parent. Majority would say
Yep.
at least one parent's inconsistent. And yeah. When does this develop? Like at
So
what
attachment
age?
styles, yeah. Interestingly enough, the original research that was done on attachment styles started with infants. Uh, so we can see evidence of this beginning at essentially at birth.
Yeah.
Once one is born, you start understanding the way that you're supposed to relate to the world around you, right? As like that very super young age, that infancy to like toddler years ish, you're really learning that the world exists at all. And one of the things that we are learning while we're learning that the world exists is whether or not our body's physical needs are being met. And mental and emotional also come into play, but for infants, of course, it's a lot easier to see where the physical needs kind of are the primary driver. Like, a baby does need love and affection and attention as well. They need it to develop healthily. But it's still in that biological state. A baby's not going to be able to say, well, you're not emotionally supporting me.
Right.
What it really is, are you giving me affection? Am I learning what it feels like to be held, to be loved? Do you comfort me
Yeah.
when I'm sad? Am I screaming and you are ignoring me? Or what's going on there? So you can see from the very beginning that infants start to learn whether or not their needs are getting met. And the way that they respond to that is sort of the beginnings of the attachment styles that you'll see. Now, to be fair, humans are incredibly resilient. Somebody could fuck up a child and then help them come back from it later.
Yeah.
It's really hard to screw somebody up to the point of no return, which is why, of course, reactive attachment disorder is so stunning and startling in its existence, because it takes a lot to get a person so broken that it's almost impossible for them to get fixed. But, ideally the goal is to get not to need to fix it too much, just to let them work. And you can, like I said, you can see all that starting right from the beginning, from infancy. If your child is crying and you're going to feed the child, your child is not just learning that like these pangs mean hunger or this feeling means that. They're also learning, if I cry, mom comes to help me. If I'm sad, dad comes to pick me up. If I'm lonely, my sibling is going to come and talk to me. They're learning how hard it is for them to get what they need from the environment around them, because ultimately it is a biological survival basis. If you don't have food, you die.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Your brain's going to
Yeah.
make it happen if it can.
Yeah. That's crazy. I never thought of that. I mean, I guess it makes sense for it to develop that
Mm-hmm.
young, and then I guess over time, if the parents stay the same, then it just
Mm-hmm. It builds and reinforces. So, like, it's not that it's not you make a mistake as a brand new parent and your child is screwed forever. It's if you work from there, you're going to start developing a type of attachment. If you are an inconsistent parent with providing what a kid needs, they're going to start to develop inconsistent reactions in return, because they've just learned that it's not a consistent way to get attention, to get food, to get love, to get whatever. And so that builds over time. And if at a later point in time, say the newborn years are really tough, PMDD is a real thing.
yeah.
Even postpartum psychosis is a real thing. Having parents who are new and don't know what to do, it's all very real. And I know plenty of people who are new parents who are freaked out because
Hmm.
they're like, what if I mess up my kid?
Yeah.
Well, the good news is they don't remember a lot from that point in time, and you can fix the pattern. Is if you manage to re-engage at some point in the next 13 or so years, you have a really good chance of your kid not having to work through the inconsistencies as much. Now, the later on you get, the longer it takes for you to kind of key in and do well, the more you will have to work to correct it. But it's not as simple as like, well, I didn't feed him once and now he's going to be a disorganized attachment style child. No. He's also got to learn how to fend for himself
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
herself or themselves. But it's that consistency. Are you being consistent and showing up even if you don't have the solution? Because if you are, you're building security. If you're inconsistent, or if you start having these emotional responses to being needed, now we've got a problem, because your kid's not getting what they need and they're not learning how to ask for it either.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, even when I was a new parent and we had a newborn, it's difficult and I wasn't healing at the time. So I know
Mm-hmm.
that I was not the best mom for my son. Like I can absolutely say that. Um, and I had these like emotional reactions to certain things and then once I started to heal, now I'm like, if he's crying over it, I'm like, yeah, let it out. You want to be sad, you want to be angry,
Mm-hmm.
and me and Mel, my co-cap, we like to parent the same way. So I mean, she has much more patience than I will ever have, but we allow him to kind of express themselves. And I think I've said to you too, I'm like, I feel like I
Oh,
hope
yeah.
I don't fuck up my son. And you're like, you're gonna. It's just,
How much are you going to do, and is it fixable? And
yeah,
honestly,
yeah,
most
yeah.
of the time, 99% of the time, if you as the parent are willing to say that was a mistake,
Mhm.
you're okay. I've done so I know I think I've mentioned this to you before, but for anyone else, I used to do work in the community as what's called an MST therapist. It's a multisystemic therapist. So I worked with families who had kids who were having severe behavioral problems, who are usually in legal trouble of some sort, or who are about to be, right? Like I had a couple kids who were uh either being released from juvie. I had a couple kids who were from areas where they were getting in court cases and having trouble, but they were like, we want to try to intervene before we get to the point of locking this kid up. I had some who came from residential facilities. You know, there's a whole spectrum of ways you can get in trouble as a kid and things that your family might have to deal with. But one of the things that I was there to do was to help families understand how systemic things influence their kid. So, you know, if a parent is not being supportive, present, emotionally available, teaching their kid how to deal with stuff, my job was actually to identify that and to help the parent realize what skills they needed to have in order to address that. And I watched. Now, not everybody did this because not every case was a success
Yeah.
and not every kid responded well, and sometimes there's damage that's too far gone or there's not enough change available in the moment to create what we needed. And no shame on any of those families, any of those parents. Like, I may not have always loved working with all of them, but they all got my absolute best I could give them at that time, and I would never dare shame or judge any of them for being in those positions. But I also got to see how sometimes that change, that shift made a huge difference. I had one kid, and I can't obviously go into a ton of detail, but I was working with this one family where the mom really stepped up. She went above and beyond to start showing up for her kid, started to be like consistent, give boundaries, expectations, and the dad had died a little while ago. And so she was still dealing with that grief. The kid was still dealing with that grief. And you could see how that had really separated them because neither of them knew how to deal with it. And then it devolved pretty hard. The kid went a
Sure.
little off the rails. Oh, a lot off the rails, actually. But you could see as the mom started to really practice like that own self regulation, working on her own reactions to stuff, the kid could start to depend on her
Mm.
and could start to expect the same response. And, you know, especially with MST, we're very deeply into attachment styles and stuff like that because it's super important. But one of the key rules is consistency. When you introduce consistency into a setting, a kid's going to try to their best to break out of it. Not because they don't want it. Everybody wants that consistency, especially emotionally, but because they didn't have it before and they need to make sure it's there for real. They have to make sure it's there for real, which is also part of why you'll see in, you know, reactive attachment people or disorganized attachment people, they will push really hard against their environments because they haven't had any kind of consistency. It's almost easier to deal with an anxious or an avoidant attachment style because you know what you're dealing with. You got the same response pattern, same stuff come up. You can address it the same way every time. It's
Yeah.
consistent. It's easier to shift. With disorganized things, it's a lot harder to make a concrete change because your instinct as a person, not just a child, but as a person, is to push, is to say, I cannot trust that any of this is going to stay around.
Mhm.
Like you've said you're changing 15,000 times and not a single one of them has it meant anything to me because you turn around and you're the same you've been every day since whenever. And as long as you can build, like continue to stick through that, you come out at the end and things are massively different. Now you have consistency, boundaries, and these really positive engagements, but you have to fight through that inconsistency first to get to the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I think trust is a really hard thing, especially for people with avoidant and disorganized attachment styles. Specifically, if I look at myself, trust is really difficult. So if I'm in a new
Mm-hmm.
relationship and they're like, "Oh, I care about you," I'm like, "We'll see." Okay,
Yep. I've heard you
cool.
say that exact thing.
Yeah. And it's like I want to
Absolutely.
believe it, and I want the closeness. Like I
Mm-hmm.
crave the closeness, and then I get it, and then my partner has spoken about being an avoidant, having an avoidant attachment style,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like, well, that may come up because I was like, well, I haven't seen it, and she said, well, it may come up later, and then immediately I got avoidant, and I was like, oh yeah.
Yep.
Like you think you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna be avoidant to me? I'm gonna be avoidant first, and I'll leave you first before you leave me. Trust me. But then I
Hmm.
actually communicated how I was feeling at
Yes.
that particular time because I thought about it for like an hour, and then I was like, okay, let me tell her how I feel and the thoughts that are coming up. So we had a discussion about it. But yeah, it's trust is important and consistency,
Hmm.
huge.
Absolutely. No, you just described exactly what an avoidant personality or an avoidant attachment style is right there in what you said too. It's that desire to avoid pain by not
Mm.
engaging, right? It's that. Consistency is easy to determine. If you know that's what you do every time, you'll learn how to step out a little bit and it's a little better. Each time you do it, it's a little less awful. If it's inconsistent, if it's disorganized, you're fighting the pendulum, right? So as a systems therapist, a lot of the time I like to talk about spectrums and where people fall in them, and one of the things that can be easier to picture for people is like a pendulum. So one of those things that hangs from the ceiling and just swings back and forth.
Yeah.
Uh, the goal is in 90% of things to hit the middle, to hit that center place where the pendulum is no longer swinging from side to side. However, we're human beings, and one of the things that humans being like to do is swing like a pendulum because when we are in a survival state, so your nervous system is in sort of this survival mode, your brain isn't functioning on a higher level. It's got big, basic thoughts. Yes, no, black, white, up, down. And what our instincts lead us to do is to say, this thing I'm experiencing is bad with a capital B. That must mean, through logic, that the opposite is good,
Right.
which rarely is that ever the actual answer. There are few things, but very few, that's actually the answer. Usually the answer is the center is correct.
Mm.
But when we're working on survival mode, when we're dealing with trauma, when we've got stuff going on that's stressing us out, our natural habit and instinct is to go from one end to the other. So for you, right, you felt that avoidant kind of snap into place right there, and you felt it and you reacted to it. Now, one of the things you could do if you were still in a disorganized space where you weren't working on yourself, so you would have found yourself flip flopping from, I'm going to avoid you before you hurt me, to, you are everything I live and breathe for on the face of the earth, and that's all that matters. And that's it. Those are the two extremes, and you would hit both of them as quickly as you could because your body is trying really hard, because your brain is really trying to figure out what you're doing wrong. Because each time it lands at one of those points, you're like, the person is like, no, that's not healthy.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
bad. And so your brain's like, oh, this one's the bad one. Okay, I guess we got to go back to the other one now.
Hmm.
And
Totally.
it's not until you work on the nervous system regulation so that your nervous system is not in charge of that process that you finally find yourself able to sort of settle in the center, where you're going to feel urges towards both. You will feel
Yeah.
yourself pulled one way or another, but you can acknowledge it. You can understand that just because this is bad does not mean that this part is good. It just means that you have something happening and you need to let it all come together.
Yeah, I think that's why self-awareness is so important, especially on the healing journey to essentially just be aware of how you're feeling and knowing, okay, me avoiding this person or saying like, okay, well, I'm going to leave you first is that's not healthy. And then just wanting to be attached to that person, that's not healthy. So it's like, okay, you know, I, the thing that
Uh-huh.
I thought to do was just talk, just communicate like this is how I'm feeling,
And that's
you
absolutely
know?
it. Now, to be fair, that's the first step, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah,
not
exactly.
fair to present it as like this one solution all fixer,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
the first step and it's the most important first step,
Yep.
right? Healing is a journey that never really ends, no matter who you are, no matter what you're dealing
Mhm.
with. Your attachment style will become secure, but that does not ever mean that you will stop feeling the draw to one or the other side. You will likely always have to fight those. And for you now, too, because, we haven't talked about this part in detail yet,
Yeah.
that does not mean that you are not a securely attached human. It just means that you came from a point where you weren't, that those instincts are going to be stronger for you than they might be for someone who had a more consistent upbringing. You can still have the secure attachment that you want, but feeling the natural urges your body goes through doesn't change that. It just represents the things you've had to fight through to get to that point.
What do you think are some like signs for kids, because I'm curious about this, that you like parents would notice if they have like an avoidant, and you can talk about adults
Yes.
too,
Oh,
but
of
I'm
course.
I'm curious to obviously secure, like, because if you want to talk about it you can, but
Security. Yeah. So, funnily enough, there have been a number of different studies done over the years on attachment styles. And, we started with infants. There is this one very famous experiment that happened. And I cannot for the life of me remember who did it or when or where. So, I apologize for my lapse of remembering on that. But I remember the experiment because it's pretty important. So the experiment centers around a mother and her child, young child, I think it was like 3 to 5 or so, might be a little bit younger. Either way, the mother and her child were asked to come into a room with a stranger. And the mother would leave at one point during the experiment and then she would come back. And that was the whole experiment was
Mhm.
leave the kid in the room with the stranger for a couple minutes, come back, see what happens. What researchers found when the we'll start with the secure attachment. The mother with the secure attachment to her child came into the room, the child would feel comfortable as long as the mom was comfortable. So they would do what's kind of called a social check. They would look back to their caregiver, see, like, they would maybe go play with the new person, but only if their parent had like an approving look or gave them permission in essence, because they see their caregiver as a source of support, protection, and safety. So they're not like overly clingy, but they're not overly cautious. They're okay. They might go play, they might not. They might just do whatever. When the parent left the room, the kid would become uncomfortable. Not screaming and crying necessarily, but they would clearly be uncomfortable with the lack of that support in the room. They may not, play as easily. They're definitely looking around, maybe calling the mom's name, something like that. And when the mom comes back, kid's happier, right? Like, oh, thank God you're back. I'm so happy. Let's go and let's be fine, right? So the whole situation, it's not that it's unemotional, it's that the emotional reactions are not extreme. They're reasonable. They make a lot of sense, for especially for a kid in the room with a stranger. Like, no, I don't want to be left in the room with a stranger I
Right.
don't know. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. So they're not comfortable. They're not happy, but they're not freaking out. Now, as you get onto the anxious attachment, you have mom bring in the kid with stranger. Stranger freaks the kid out from the moment they're there. They may or may not notice them at first because they will be enmeshed in overly connected to their parent. They will be attached to the parent. They'll only interact with the stranger if the parent is like literally right there. I mean, we've all seen kids kind of like this. So don't take it as like the immediate, oh my God, your child has an anxious attachment disorder. There are also shy children.
Right.
That
Yeah.
also exists. But that's why they had the kids walk out and come back, or the moms walk out and come back in. So we have the mom walk out with the anxious attachment kid. Kid's freaking the hell out. Like, no, inconsolable. Nothing can
Mhm.
fix this problem. And then when the mom comes back, they tear over. They're giving them a hug. They're like crying into them. They're absolutely upset. And that would be the anxious attachment, right? Like you being gone makes me so dysregulated that I am screaming and crying, missing you. And I'm not sure what to do and I'm not able to be consoled. Now, an avoidant attachment child comes in, doesn't really give two shits about the parent. That's kind of the rule of thumb for the whole thing. Kid doesn't care if the parent approves or not of them talking to the stranger or playing with toys. Kid doesn't really care when the parent walks away. The kid doesn't really care when the parent comes back because they are avoidant. They're not
Right.
emotionally engaged with their parent in a way that they should be. And there's that. So then we have this disorganized attachment and sort of that spectrum where we hit rad parents as well. I believe this is where they really started defining that as a unique experience. A disorganized kid is likely to have a variety of different responses.
Mhm.
One of the responses that they would see is a kid who doesn't really care that their parent is there, gets upset when they leave, and then physically lashes out when they come back
Mm.
because they are upset, dysregulated, not okay with what's happening, but they don't have a consistent reaction to depend on. So their reaction is unpredictable and often angry because these kids are already in a life that's very unpredictable for them. Like you can just tell based on their behavior, they're in a space that is uncomfortable, unpredictable. What do kids do when their safe people come back? They lash out, usually. I mean, not all the time. Again, this is generalizations on behavior that sometimes applies and sometimes doesn't. But one of the things that those kids do would lash out reactively because they are punishing their parent for making them more uncomfortable by leaving.
Mm, interesting.
Yeah.
So, do you think that would work the same in adults in
What you might see more, though, is people with an avoidant attachment style won't care as much about what you're doing. They're going to be the partners who walk away from you at a group function and go talk to somebody else. They are going to be people who don't necessarily watch out for you as you walk through the door. They're not going to go and, like, if they see you're upset, they may not go and try to comfort you. They may feel uncomfortable with the emotion and walk away because they don't know what to do with that emotion, because they are not people who understand or cope with emotion particularly well. So they're just like, I'm not touching this because this could hurt me.
Interesting. So, do you think, just curious, like an anxious and avoidant would work? I mean, I'm assuming like avoidant is like
They
not
can.
good.
I mean, all of this has to be taken with understanding that like people are people and they're
Yeah.
going to be. Oh, there are different kinds of abuse and bad relationship dynamics that fit into each different type of person, except for a secure relationship, which obviously, again, it's not the absence of problems, it's how do you deal with them? It's do you have the skills, the tools, the nervous system regulation to deal with what's happening? So, people who have an anxious and an avoidant attachment disorder in some cases can work quite well together because you have sort of this self-reinforcing correction to behavior. Now, this would require people who are willing to be somewhat self-aware or at the very least care about their partner. Because if I'm a person who has an anxious attachment disorder and I'm, dating somebody who has an avoidant attachment disorder or disordered attachment style, whatever, if we've got these two different types of attachment going on, but I love my partner and my partner loves me, then my goal is not to be overly clingy or obsessive or that. I might know that I have those tendencies or like, oh, I'm the crazy girlfriend or something. I'm not a girl, but
Yeah,
I'm the
yeah, I
crazy
got you.
girlfriend. And then the partner being like, well, I tolerate this behavior in you, but I like you. And you doing this makes me uncomfortable, so I like distance myself from that emotional overabundance in order to protect myself. But if you have the ability to come back together, if it's not like I'm leaving you here and I'm not going to talk to you for 2 days because you've emotionally lashed out at me, and it's like I'm just going to wait for you to be done here and then we can like kind of come back to talk about it, you find a reasonably healthy relationship dynamic. You got people who have very different and sometimes not very healthy attachment styles, but you can see sometimes that does actually reinforce it working well. At the same time, you can see people who have the same attachment style working well together too sometimes because you're both expecting the same thing from each other. You both see the world through similar colored glasses. So you're not feeling put off or frustrated by it as often,
Mm,
theoretically. Now, there are so many more aspects to people than just personality types and attachment
yeah.
styles and things like that. You got to throw in stressors, mental health, more aspects about upbringing, what kind of people you are, the society you're in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not really something you can just boil down to that aspect, but it can play a part and often does play a part. I mean, how many people do you know who have like that really clingy girlfriend? And they're just like, man, she's always texting me all the time. Why does she want my attention so much, bro? And then they end up married and you're like,
Yeah.
why are you together? This doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
they managed to make it work well enough. And then they have 2 children and eventually they divorced.
I mean, I can understand how maybe like an anxious attachment style would work. Um, and like an anxious and avoidant attachment style. But I guess they would have to, I mean, ideally you would want both partners to be aware of their attachment style and then have to figure out how to work together
Mm-hmm.
on not that they can heal each other, but they can support each other through their healing and learn
Yes.
what triggers, the triggers their partner essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So,
A lot of this is based on, are you willing to be a better person for someone else? And if the answer is yes, then there really is no combination that can't work. If the answer is no, then you should really work on yourself before you bother getting into a relationship because they're never going to work out well.
yeah, that's true.
And again, like I think I've pointed out to you before, there's a very big difference between changing for somebody else and changing on behalf of somebody else. Changing on behalf of somebody else is saying like for me, I have changed a lot on behalf of my partner. But it's change I have done and it's my change and I've worked very hard for it. I just have someone in my life who gives me the desire to be better. And so I take the desire and I use it to work on the things I need to work on. As opposed to like you cannot change on you can't change for someone else.
Sure.
That's not authentic or genuine to you. You need to be the reason you're changing. But I can want to be a very complicated way of putting it. I want to change because I want to be the kind of person that my partner loves. And I already know he likes me quite a lot, so we're good on
I don't
that.
think so.
But but I want to continue to be that person and for me personally, I've said person way too many times. For me personally, that means I have to be willing to go through change and growth to be worthy of having a partner who supports me.
Yeah, amen. I mean, I started healing, I think 5 years ago at this point or 4 years ago. I don't know. Um, because I wanted to be better. I don't know. I just felt this innate urge to start healing, but I wanted to be a better mom and I wanted to be a better partner. And I think the more you pour into yourself and you become the best version of you, that you'll end up being a better partner. You'll end up being a better mom because you're your best
Hmm.
version, or trying to be anyway. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
well, that'll be the end of our episode. But um I pull a card at the end of every episode.
Yes.
So um if my guest wants to pull a card, they can. If not,
Oh,
I can.
I see my cards. I'll go get them.
Nice.
Today we have the Wild Unknown Tarot deck because said tarot because that was funny to me. It's tarot. I do know that. Like I'm talking to people who don't actually know me here, so I have to make sure I reference certain aspects. All right. So your pull for today is the Father of Pentacles.
Oh,
It's very pretty. I find this deck to be
I
gorgeous.
love that deck.
I'm a sucker for like black and white with rainbows though.
Yeah.
So let me find where that is in this book. All right, Father of Pentacles. It says steady and entrepreneurial. The Father of Pentacles is a steady, gentle man. Upon first meeting, he can almost seem dull because of his extremely calm temperament, but underneath is an incredibly passionate man who prioritizes the stability of his job, family, and home. He is entrepreneurial and diligent at work, a true pleasure to know. I
All
love
right.
that. That's delightful.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Well, thank you for pulling and thank you for coming on the pod.
Yes, my
Um,
pleasure.
yeah, I plan to.
I'm sure you'll see me again
I was
because you
gonna
have a whole
say,
bunch of topics.
I do so many topics. So, yes, cannot wait to have you back. And that's it. I'll
Awesome.
see you our next session. So,
Yes, yes, you will.
okay. All right, Danae. Bye.
Awesome. Bye.